Rebecca Mercer stood on a railroad platform with her wedding bonnet crushed in one hand and a station master's bill in the other, while half of Mercy Creek watched her learn she had no husband waiting. The man who had paid for her ticket had sent only a note. No money, no marriage. She had traveled 3 days with one carpet bag, a borrowed dress, and the foolish hope that a new name might save her from hunger. Now the wind lifted coal dust against her cheeks like ash, and laughter slipped from the crowd behind the freight barrels. Then a dark horse stopped near the depot steps, and Deputy Miles Preet looked down at the abandoned bride, as if every cruel voice had suddenly gone silent. Before this frontier story unfolds, comment the country you are watching from. If you believe one kind cowboy can change a forgotten woman's life, subscribe so you do not miss the next romance. The train had barely pulled away when Rebecca Mercer understood that a town could be louder in silence than in shouting. The engine dragged its black smoke west, leaving Mercy Creek wrapped in dust, coal grit, and the sharp smell of hot iron. Rebecca stood alone beside a trunk that was not hers, in a blue traveling dress faded at the elbows and too thin for the wind cutting down from the high plains. Her carpetbag rested at her feet. Inside it were 2 aprons, one Bible with her mother's name written on the first page, a comb missing 3 teeth, and 3 pennies wrapped in a handkerchief. 3 pennies, and no husband. The station master, Mr. Gable, held the telegram between 2 fingers as though shame could stain him. "Well, miss," he said, not unkindly, but not softly either, "I can't keep the platform clear with you standing here all afternoon." Rebecca looked at the paper again, though she had already read the words until they cut grooves in her mind. Bride refused. No dowry sent. Arrangement canceled. Send her back, if possible. It was signed by Horace Tully, a dry goods clerk from Mercy Creek, who had written 6 letters promising a small home, steady meals, and a church wedding before harvest. He had called her Dear Rebecca in black ink. He had said a quiet woman would suit him. He had said he did not care about beauty, only good character, but he had cared about money. Behind her, a boy snickered, a woman whispered, "Railroad bride," as if saying the words made Rebecca less than a woman and more like a damaged crate unloaded at the wrong stop. Rebecca folded the telegram with careful fingers. She would not cry where they could see. She had done enough crying in Kansas City after the boarding house closed, after the seamstress work dried up, after the landlord stood in the doorway and told her charity was for widows and orphans, not able-bodied girls with pride. "I can pay you for the platform fee," she said. Mr. Gable glanced at her hand. She opened the handkerchief and showed the 3 pennies. His mouth pulled tight. "That won't cover a return ticket. I know that. Won't cover a room either. I know that too." Across the street, men stood outside the mercantile, pretending not to stare. Mercy Creek was smaller than she had imagined from Horace Tully's letters. 1 main street, 1 church steeple, 1 jail, a livery, a barber pole, a blacksmith shed, and the kind of open sky that made a person feel exposed before God and everyone else. A wagon rattled past. 2 women lifted their skirts to avoid the mud and looked Rebecca up and down. One of them, plump and powdered, gave a small laugh. "Poor thing," she said, but the words had no mercy in them. Rebecca lifted her chin. That was when Horace Tully finally appeared. He came out of the dry goods store wearing a narrow black coat and a face too pale for the sun. He had sandy hair, combed flat, and spectacles that flashed when he saw her. For one foolish breath, Rebecca thought he might apologize. She thought he might have been forced by someone else. She thought the telegram might have been sent in panic, and that seeing her standing there, tired and hungry and real, would stir some decency in him. Instead, he stopped 6 feet away and said, "You should not have come without the funds agreed upon." Rebecca felt every eye turn sharper. "There were no funds agreed upon," she said quietly. "You wrote that you wanted a wife. I wrote that I wanted a respectable match. I am respectable." A man near the depot coughed to hide a laugh. Horace's cheeks reddened. Miss Mercer, this is unpleasant enough without you making a scene. Rebecca looked around at the faces, watching from windows, porches, wagon seats, and doorways. She had not made the scene. She had merely been placed in the middle of it. I sold my winter coat to pay for the last part of the fare, she said. You knew I had little. I knew you had little, Horace said. I did not know you had nothing. The words struck harder than if he had raised a hand. Something in Rebecca went still. She took the little paper packet from her sleeve. It held the ribbon he had sent her, pale yellow, meant for the wedding bonnet. She stepped forward and placed it in his palm. "Fanumai, keep what you paid for," she said. Horace looked at the ribbon, as though it embarrassed him more than his own cruelty. Someone laughed outright now. A sharp, careless sound. Rebecca turned away before her face betrayed her. She bent for her carpet bag, but hunger and travel made the platform tilt. Her fingers missed the handle once, twice. A girl at the edge of the crowd whispered, "She's going to faint." Rebecca would not faint. Not for Horace Tully. Not for Mercy Creek. She gripped the handle and straightened. Then a horse's iron shoes struck the packed earth beside the depot. The sound came slow and steady, not like a man arriving in haste, but like a man who expected the world to make room. A tall bay gelding stopped at the hitching rail. The rider wore a dust-colored hat, a dark vest, worn chaps, and a deputy's star pinned to his coat. A rifle sat in the saddle boot. A coil of rope hung near his knee. He had the kind of face weather had tried to carve into stone, all hard lines and shadowed eyes, with a dark mustache and a scar crossing the edge of his jaw. Miles Pruitt swung down from the saddle. No one laughed after that. He tied his horse and looked once at Horace, once at the station master, and then at Rebecca's hand clenched white around the carpet bag. "Gable," he said, voice low. "Deputy, I came for salt, coffee, lamp oil, and nails." Didn't know the railroad was delivering public entertainments now. A few men shifted their boots. Horace cleared his throat. "This is a private matter." Miles looked at the crowd. "Doesn't appear private." Rebecca did not want rescue. Rescue, in her experience, often came with a bill she could not pay. She forced herself to meet his eyes. They were gray, not soft, but steady. "I am leaving the platform," she said. "Where to?" She had no answer. Horace spoke quickly. "That is not my concern." "No," Miles said, still watching Rebecca. "I reckon it stopped being your concern when courage cost more than you wanted to spend." Horace stiffened. "Deputy Pruitt, you have no right." "I have the right to keep order." "There is no disorder." Miles turned his head slightly. "A hungry woman shamed in public is disorder enough for me." Rebecca felt heat rise to her face. Hungry, he had seen it. Noticed the tremor in her hand, the hollow under her cheek, the way she stood too carefully because any sudden movement might betray weakness. "I do not need pity," she said. His gaze did not change. "Good, I'm not offering any." Then he stepped aside, giving her a path down from the platform that did not force her to pass Horace. It was a small thing, a respectful thing. It nearly undid her. The town watched as Rebecca Mercer walked down those steps with 3 pennies to her name, and no idea where the next hour would find her. Miles Pruitt walked beside her, not touching her, not claiming her, not hurrying her, and behind them the train smoke thinned into the wide and pitiless sky. Miles Pruitt had ridden into Mercy Creek meaning to buy supplies and leave before noon. His ranch lay 12 miles east, where the grass turned silver in the wind and the cottonwoods leaned over Sweetwater Creek. He kept 6 horses, 40 head of cattle, 2 milk cows, 1 stubborn mule, and a house too quiet for a man who had once believed noise was a burden. Since his brother's death 3 years earlier, quiet had become a sentence. He served as deputy because Sheriff Amos Bell had bad knees and needed a younger man who could ride hard when trouble crossed county lines. Miles took the work because it kept him moving. A man moving fast did not have to sit with ghosts. But the woman at the depot had stopped him. Not because she was pretty, though she was in a worn, tired way. Not because she was helpless, because she was not. Miles had seen helpless. Helpless looked around for someone to blame. Rebecca Mercer had stood straight while humiliation gathered like wolves, and she had refused to give them tears. That was harder than cry. He walked her to the shade beside the mercantile. The crowd began to scatter now that the deputy had spoiled their amusement. Horace Tully vanished through the dry goods door, his pride tucked around him like a Sunday coat. Miles removed his hat. There's a cafe 2 doors down. Mrs. Lark keeps coffee hot and stew most days. Rebecca, fingers tightened on the carpet bag. I told you I have no money. I heard what you told Gable. Then why mention a cafe? Because you need food. Her eyes flashed. Needy is not the same as taking. Miles almost smiled. Almost. No, he said. Isn't. She looked away, and he saw her swallow. Her pride was not vanity. It was the last shelter she owned. He glanced at the mercantile window. In the glass, half the town still watched in reflection. You know how to sew? He asked. Rebecca blinked. I.S. Cook. I.S. Read figures? Well enough? Milk a cow? A pause. Badly, but I can learn. That time, the smile nearly reached his mouth. Mrs. Lark needs help today. Her niece left for Abilene, and the cafe's full every evening. I can ask if she'll trade a meal for work. Rebecca studied him carefully. Why? Because it gives you a chair without making you beg for one. Her expression changed, not softening exactly, but opening a fraction. I would accept work, she said. I figured. Mrs. Lark's cafe smelled of beans, onions, coffee, and yeast rolls. The woman who owned it was broad-shouldered, silver-haired, and sharp-eyed. She looked at Miles, then at Rebecca, then at the carpetbag. I don't hire trouble, Mrs. Lark said. Miles held her gaze. Then don't make any, Mrs. Lark snorted. You always did talk like a fence post learned scripture. Rebecca stepped forward before Miles could answer. Ma'am, I can wash dishes, sweep men linen, serve tables, and keep accounts if needed. I do not ask charity. I will take whatever meal you think fair for the work. Mrs. Lark's face changed just enough. You burn biscuits. Not our. If the oven draws steady. You steal? No. You weep when spoken to plain. Rebecca lifted her chin. Not often. The cafe owner looked at Miles. She can start with dishes. You paying for her meal if she breaks my good plates? I'll pay for the plates, Miles said. She'll pay for her meal with work. Rebecca looked at him then. Something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude. My bay. Warning, my bay. Both. For 2 hours, Miles made his rounds and bought supplies, while Rebecca worked in the kitchen. He heard bits of talk as he moved along the street. Railroad bride. Tully was smart not to take her. Pretty enough, but no money. Deputy looked ready to bite somebody. Miles bought salt, coffee, lamp oil, nails, flour, 2 hinges, and a sack of peppermint candy for Sheriff Bell's grandchildren. He also bought a pair of plain gloves from the mercantile, because he had noticed Rebecca's hands were chapped raw from cold travel, and dishwater would split them worse. He did not give them to her in the cafe. That would make a show. Instead, near dusk, when he found her behind the building hanging wet towels on a line, he set the gloves on an upturned crate. Mrs. Lark said your shift is done. Rebecca looked at the gloves. Those are not mine. They are if you choose to take them. I have not earned them. You can mend 2 saddle blankets at my place. That'll cover them. Her eyes narrowed. Your place. My housekeeper left last month to live with her daughter. I need help for a week. Might be 2. Cooking, mending, laundry, whatever you can manage. There's a room off the kitchen with a door that locks from the inside. You'll be paid wages. Mrs. Lark can hold the money if you don't trust me. The wind moved strands of hair against Rebecca's cheek. In the fading light, she looked younger than he had first thought. My B, 24, my Bay, 26, with eyes the color of strong tea, and a mouth trained by life not to tremble. "You are a deputy," she said. "That does not mean you are safe." "No," he said. "It doesn't." The answer surprised her. Miles rested one boot on the crate, keeping distance between them. "Sheriff Bell can vouch for me. Mrs. Lark can too, though she'll mention every fault I have and invent some new ones. Why offer this?" He looked toward the depot. The platform sat empty now, but he could still see her standing there in his mind, surrounded and alone. "Because I saw a town judge you by what you lack," he said. "I'd rather judge by what you do." Rebecca looked down at her hands. Slowly, she picked up the gloves. She did not put them on. "I will speak to Mrs. Lark," she said. "And Sheriff Bell, you should. If either gives me reason to refuse, I will. You should do that too." A faint curve touched her mouth and disappeared so quickly. He wondered if he had imagined it. By sundown, Mrs. Lark had fed Rebecca stew and cornbread. Sheriff Bell had given Miles a look that said he was either honorable or foolish, and the town had found a new subject to whisper over. Miles loaded his wagon under a violet sky. Rebecca came out with her carpet bag, wearing the plain gloves. She climbed onto the wagon seat without help, though Miles stood ready in case she asked. As they rolled east, Mercy Creek shrank behind them, its windows glowing like watchful eyes. For a long while, neither spoke. Then Rebecca said, "I will pay you back for the gloves." Miles kept his eyes on the road. "I know. For the meal too, if Mrs. Lark charges you." "She won't, but if she does," he nodded, "then you'll pay." The tension in her shoulders eased by the smallest measure. The moon rose over the prairie, pale and clean. Miles clicked to the team, and the wagon carried the penniless railroad bride away from the town that had named her worthless. The Pritt place appeared out of the dark by lamplight. Rebecca saw a low house of weathered pine, a barn with one door hanging crooked, a windmill turning slow, and cottonwoods gathered behind the yard like old women whispering over a fence. The place was not grand. It was not poor either. It had the worn look of something built by hands that expected storms. Miles helped her down only after she held out her hand. His palm was warm, calloused, and brief. He released her the moment her boots touched the ground. Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke, leather, coffee, and dust. A braided rug lay crooked near the hearth. A rifle hung above the mantel. There were 2 chairs at the table, one used often, and one pushed too far under, as if it had been waiting for someone who never came. Miles lit a lamp and showed her the room off the kitchen. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a quilt folded at the foot. "The bolt works," he said, stepping back. "I'll sleep in the front room. If you need anything, knock on the wall." Rebecca touched the door bolt. "Thank you," he nodded once. "Breakfast is usually before sunup, but you've traveled. Sleep till you wake. I came here to work. I came here to work. You'll work better alive." It was the gentlest, harsh thing she had ever heard. Rebecca did not sleep late. She woke before dawn to the low complaint of cattle and the clank of a bucket outside. For a moment, she did not know where she was. Then she remembered the platform, the telegram, Horace's pale face, and Miles Pruitt's steady eyes. She dressed quickly and found the kitchen cold. The stove had been cleaned, but not laid. Flowers sat in a tin, beans soaked in a cracked bowl. Coffee beans waited in a sack near the shelf. She could work with that. By the time Miles came in, carrying milk and smelling of frost, biscuits were in the oven and coffee boiled on the stove. He stopped in the doorway. Rebecca braced herself. "You prefer breakfast another way. You can tell me." "I prefer it cooked." "Then we are in agreement." His mouth twitched. They ate at the table while sunrise filled the window. Miles said little. Rebecca appreciated that. Talk could be kind, but it could also be a hand reaching where it had not been invited. After breakfast, he carried the dishes to the basin. "I can do those," she said. "You cooked? I am paid to work. You'll have enough." He said it plainly, not as flattery. She looked at him with suspicion, because she did not know what to do with fairness offered without performance. The days settled into a rhythm. Rebecca scrubbed, cooked, mended, swept, and learned the shape of the Prute place. She found old shirts in need of patching, curtains faded past saving, and a pantry that needed order. She learned that Miles took coffee black, preferred beans with salt pork, disliked waste, and never used more words than required. She learned that he spoke more easily to animals than to people. With horses, his voice lowered. With cattle, it steadied. With the old mule Gideon, it became almost affectionate. "You contrary old sinner," he murmured one morning, rubbing the mule's neck while Gideon tried to chew his sleeve. "You bite that coat and I'll make you pull fence posts till Judgment Day." Rebecca, carrying a basket of laundry, paused near the barn door. Miles glanced over. Caught. "I did not know deputies threatened mules with scripture," she said. "He understands it better than most men." She smiled before she could stop herself. He saw it. His expression changed, just a little, like sunlight touching a locked door. That afternoon, rain moved in hard from the west. It came with a gray wall of wind, rattling the barn boards and bending the grass flat. Miles was out checking a weak calf in the lower pasture. Rebecca saw the storm swallow him and stood at the kitchen window, uneasy. When he did not return by supper, she took a lantern, wrapped herself in his spare coat from the peg, and went out. The rain hit like thrown gravel. Mud pulled at her boots. She found him near the creek, kneeling beside a calf tangled in loose wire. His hat was gone, his hair soaked dark, and blood ran from a cut across his knuckles. "You should be inside," he shouted over the rain. "So should you." He looked at her, then at the lantern. "Hold that higher." Together they freed the calf. Rebecca held the trembling animal while Miles cut the last wire. The calf kicked mud up her skirt and nearly knocked her down, but she held firm. When they finally got back to the barn, both were soaked through. Miles shut the door against the storm. For a moment, the barn held only the sound of rain on the roof and their breathing. Rebecca saw him favor his left side. "You are hurt?" "It's nothing. You say that like a man who lies badly." His eyes met hers. No one had told him that in years. She found a clean rag and made him sit on an overturned bucket. He resisted until she said, "I cannot work for a man who bleeds on everything. It makes the laundry unreasonable." He sat. The wound on his hand was deep but clean. She washed it with water from the pump and tied it tight. His fingers were strong under hers, but he did not move. "You have done this before," he said. "My father cut timber. My brothers believed caution was an insult to manhood. You have family." She tied the knot too firmly. He winced. "I had family." The word had landed before she could soften it. Miles looked toward the closed barn door. Fever, debt first, then fever, then distance. It all becomes the same after a while. He said nothing, and that silence was kinder than a question. When the storm lessened, they crossed the yard together. At the porch, Rebecca started to remove his coat from her shoulders, but he shook his head. "Keep it till morning. It is yours. It's wet. So am I, you argue like a lawyer. You command like a man accustomed to being disobeyed by mules." There it was again, the almost smile. That night, Rebecca made potato soup and thick bread. Miles sat across from her with his bandaged hand resting near his bowl. Rain tapped the roof. The house felt less empty. After supper, a knock sounded at the door. Miles rose, hand going to the revolver at his hip. A boy stood on the porch, rain dripping from his hat. He was my Benai, thin as kindling, with red-rimmed eyes and a sack clutched against his chest. "Deputy Prute," the boy said. "Ma says if you got any medicine left from when Sheriff Bell was sick, could you come? My little sister's burning up." Miles took his coat at once. Rebecca stepped forward. "I can come." He looked at her. "My mother nursed half our county through fever," she said. "I know how to cool a child and keep broth down." The boy looked at her with desperate hope. Miles gave one nod. "Get your shawl." They rode in the wagon through mud to the Harper place. where 3 children slept under quilts and a woman with hollow eyes held a feverish girl. Rebecca moved quietly, firmly. She cooled the child's skin, changed bedding, boiled water, sweetened willow tea, and showed Mrs. Harper how to keep the fever from turning worse. Miles watched from the doorway. He had seen Rebecca shamed. He had seen her hungry. Now he saw her useful, in a way no gossip could understand. She did not perform kindness. She gave it like a woman who knew what neglect cost. Near dawn, the child's fever broke. Mrs. Harper wept into her apron. "God bless you, Miss Mercer." Rebecca's face tightened at the blessing, as if she had not expected to receive one in Mercy Creek. On the ride home, Miles said, "You saved that girl trouble. I helped her through a night. That matters." Rebecca looked at the light growing along the wet horizon. Most things that matter do not look grand while they are happening. Miles carried those words with him long after they reached the ranch. By the second week, Mercy Creek had decided Rebecca Mercer was either a schemer or a saint, and the town disliked both possibilities. The women at church looked at her dress, her bonnet, her empty ring finger, and the place where she sat 3 pews behind Miles' Prout. The men looked at Miles and wondered what claim he had made without speaking it. Horace Tully avoided her until avoiding her became more noticeable than greeting her. Rebecca had not wanted to attend Sunday service. Miles had not pressed her. "The wagon goes at 8, he had said. "You can ride along or stay. Your choice." Choice. The word had become unfamiliar enough to hurt. She rode along. Inside the church, Reverend Pike preached on mercy with the uncertain courage of a man watching his congregation fail at it in real time. Mrs. Lark sat beside Rebecca without asking and shared a hymnal. When the singing began, Rebecca's voice came soft at first, then steadier. Miles, standing across the aisle near the back, turned his head at the sound. He had not known she could sing. Horace Tully knew too. His face pinched each time her voice rose. After service, the trouble began in the churchyard. Mrs. Tully, Horace's widowed mother, approached with her black parasol and a mouth shaped for judgment. "Miss Mercer," she said, "I hope you understand my son was placed in a difficult position." Rebecca held her Bible against her stomach. "I understand he made his position clear. A man must protect his future. Marriage is not a soup kitchen." A few women nearby fell silent. Miles, speaking with Sheriff Bell near the hitching rail, looked over. Rebecca felt the old burn of public shame rise up her throat. But something had changed since the depot. She had slept under a safe roof. She had earned meals. She had held a sick child through fever. She had stood in a storm and not been blown away. "No," Rebecca said. "Marriage is not a soup kitchen. That is why no man should invite a woman across 2 states and expect payment for keeping his word." Mrs. Tully's eyes widened. Mrs. Lark made a sound that might have been a cough or a blessing. Horace stepped forward. "That is enough." Rebecca turned to him. It was enough on the platform. His face darkened. "Careful, Miss Mercer. A woman with no people should not make enemies." Miles moved then. Not fast, not dramatic. He simply crossed the yard until he stood beside Rebecca, not in front of her. "She has people," he said. Every head turned. Rebecca looked up at him, startled. Horace laughed once, without humor. "Yes, that's so." Miles' jaw tightened. "Yes." Mrs. Tully looked him over. "Deputy Pritt, surely you are not staking your good name on a woman who arrived as a discarded bride." The words struck the yard like a slap. Rebecca's fingers clenched around her Bible. Miles took one step closer to her side, close enough that his sleeve brushed hers. Not possessive, public. "My name is not so delicate. It can be damaged by standing near an honest woman," he said. Sheriff Bell limped closer, his face grave. "Thou do for Sunday, Mrs. Tully." But Horace was not finished. Pride had cornered him, and a cornered coward can be meaner than a brave man. "Ask her about the brooch," he said. Rebecca went still. Miles turned. "What brooch?" Horace raised his voice. "My mother's garnet brooch." went missing from the mercantile yesterday. Miss Mercer was seen near the counter when she came in for a thread. A penniless woman might be tempted by small valuables. The churchyard erupted in whispers. Rebecca felt the world narrow. I took nothing, she said. Mrs. Tully touched her collar as if the absent brooch had been torn from her throat. I did not wish to accuse anyone publicly. Mrs. Lark barked. Then why are you doing it? Horace ignored her. I only say Deputy Prairie should be cautious before placing trust where it has not been earned. Rebecca looked at Miles. This was the moment. She knew it with the deep old knowledge poverty teaches. Many people were kind in kitchens and barns. Fewer remained kind under watching eyes. Fewer still would risk their own standing when accusation entered the air. Miles did not ask whether she had taken it. He asked, "Who saw her?" Horace faltered. "I was told." "By who?" "My clerk." "Where is he?" "At the store." "Then we'll go. Ask him." Mrs. Tully lifted her chin. "Are you calling my son a liar?" Miles's voice dropped. "I'm calling this an accusation. Accusations need legs under them." He turned to Rebecca. "Will you come?" Her throat tightened. "Yes." They walked to the mercantile with half the church trailing behind. Inside, the young clerk, Sammy Wilkes, turned pale when he saw the crowd. Miles removed his hat. "Sammy, Mr. Tully says you saw Miss Mercer near the counter yesterday." Sammy swallowed. "She bought thread. Did you see her take a brooch?" "No, sir," Horace snapped. "You said she looked at the case." "She did," Sammy said miserably. "But so did Mrs. Tully. She took it out to show Mrs. Pike how it caught the light." Mrs. Tully stiffened. "I returned it." Sammy's eyes moved toward the storage shelves. Miles saw it. "Where is it, Sammy?" The boy looked near tears. "I didn't steal it. I swear. Mr. Tully told me to clean the case, and I put the brooch in a flour tin so it wouldn't get scratched. Then I forgot. It's there." He pointed. Miles opened the tin. The garnet brooch lay inside, wrapped in brown paper. Silence fell. Rebecca stared at the small red stones. Her knees wanted to loosen, but she held steady. Miles set the brooch on the counter. "There's your thief." Horace flushed. "A misunderstanding." Rebecca looked at him. "No. A misunderstanding is when someone mistakes the road. This was a rope thrown at my neck." The words were quiet, but they reached every corner of the store. Horace's mouth opened, then closed. Mrs. Tully took the brooch with shaking fingers. She did not apologize. That was when Miles did something Rebecca never expected. He turned to the gathered town and said, "Miss Mercer works at my ranch. She is under my protection as any honest worker would be. Any man or woman with a charge against her can bring it to my office with proof. Any person spreading filth without proof can answer to me." Sheriff Bell cleared his throat. "And to me." The crowd began to break apart. Rebecca walked out into the sunlight, her heart pounding. Miles followed. At the wagon, she stopped. "You should not have done that." "Which part?" "Stood for me like that." "You stood for yourself. I just made the room listen. That will cost you. Most things worth doing do." She looked at him then, really looked. Beneath the hard face and deputy's star was a grief he carried like a hidden wound. She did not know its name yet, but she knew what pain looked like when it had been trained not to speak. "Miles," she said, using his given name for the first time. His eyes changed at the sound. "Thank you." He looked away toward the horses. "You're welcome, Rebecca." Her name in his voice felt different from how Horace had written it. Not like a claim, like a truth. The next trouble did not come in whispers. It came at night, carrying guns. Miles had been expecting it, though he had not told Rebecca enough to frighten her. 2 weeks before she arrived, he and Sheriff Bell had stopped a stage robbery outside Cotton Draw. One man escaped with a bullet in his shoulder, and a promise shouted into the dust. Miles Pruitt would pay. The outlaw's name was Rance Decker, and he had friends mean enough to mistake revenge for loyalty. Miles had ridden patrols, checked tracks, warned ranchers, and slept lightly with his revolver near his hand. But danger, like shame, often chooses the hour when a person has begun to breathe easier. That evening, Rebecca made chicken stew with dumplings because the air had turned cold. Miles repaired harness by the stove, while she mended a tear in his coat. The house held the small sounds of work, needle through cloth, leather creak, fire settling. "You need new cuffs," she said. "I need less barbed wire. You need both." He looked up. "You always this bossy with employers?" "Only the poorly maintained ones." The smile came then, real and brief. Rebecca saw it, and looked back at her sewing before he could see what it did to her. A knock hit the door. Not a neighbor's knock, too hard, too late. Miles stood, all softness gone. "Go to your room," he said. Rebecca set the coat aside. "Who is it?" "Rebecca." The way he said her name told her enough. She rose and moved toward the kitchen, but not to hide. She took the lantern from the table and lowered the flame until the room dimmed. Miles noticed. Approval flickered in his eyes. A voice called from outside. "Deputy Pritt, we know you're home." Miles stood beside the window, not in front of it. "What do you want, Decker?" A laugh answered. "You know." Rebecca's pulse hammered. Another voice said, "Heard you got yourself a bride in there. Railroad cast-off, ain't she?" "My bae. We take her instead." Miles' face changed. It was not anger alone. It was something colder. He looked at Rebecca and pointed toward the floor, behind the stove. She crouched there, hidden from the window but able to see him. "If you men ride off now," Miles called, "you live long enough to regret coming." Gunfire cracked through the window. Glass burst across the floor. Rebecca clapped a hand over her mouth. Miles fired once through the wall beside the door, then moved low across the room as another bullet punched the cupboard. Outside, horses screamed and men cursed. Miles reached the kitchen. "Cellar door," he said. "Now." She shook her head. "You cannot hold them alone. I can hold them better if I'm not worrying about you." The words struck with more force than the bullets. Rebecca moved toward the cellar, then stopped. Through the broken window, she saw a glow near the barn. "They're firing the hay," she whispered. Miles turned. A flame caught in the straw stack beside the barn wall. "The horses." Miles swore under his breath and ran for the back door. Rebecca did not go to the cellar. She grabbed the heavy wool blanket from the peg, soaked it in the water bucket, and ran after him into the freezing night. Smoke rolled low across the yard. One outlaw fired from near the corral. Miles shot the man's rifle from his hand and kept moving. The barn door was barred from the outside with a fence rail. Inside, horses kicked and screamed. Rebecca ran bent low, dragging the wet blanket. A shot snapped past her shoulder. Miles saw her and shouted, "Get down!" But the burning straw had begun to climb the wall. She threw the wet blanket over the flames and beat at them with both hands. Heat seared her wrists. Smoke filled her throat. Miles tore the fence rail free and threw the barn door open. Horses surged, wild-eyed, into the yard. One outlaw came around the corner behind him. Rebecca saw the raised gun. There was no time to think. She snatched the lantern from the ground and hurled it hard. It struck the man's arm, burst oil across his sleeve, and startled him enough that his shot went high. Miles turned and drove him down with the butt of his revolver. More shots sounded from the road. Then Sheriff Bell's voice roared, "Drop those guns." Men scattered. Hooves pounded into darkness. One outlaw lay groaning near the corral. Another limped with both hands raised. Rance Decker himself vanished into the cottonwoods, but not before Miles fired and knocked the hat from his head. Then the yard went quiet, except for frightened animals and Rebecca, coughing in the smoke. Miles was at her side in 2 strides. "You're burned. So is your barn. Your hands." She looked down. Her wrists were red, blistering along one side. Pain arrived all at once, bright and deep. Miles wrapped them gently in the clean part of his bandana. His own hands shook. "You were supposed to go to the cellar," he said. "The horses were supposed to stay alive." His eyes lifted to hers. "You could have been killed. So could you." The words hung between them, raw and simple. Sheriff Bell and 2 men from town secured the captured outlaws. Mrs. Lark arrived in a wagon. with blankets, bandages, and a face full of fury. She took one look at Rebecca's hands and began scolding every man in reach, including God, though respectfully. By dawn, the barn still stood, scorched along one wall. 2 horses had cuts, but none were lost. The outlaws were hauled to jail. Miles' house had a broken window, bullet holes in the cupboard, and smoke stains on the curtains Rebecca had just washed. But the worst cost came near noon. Sheriff Bell sat at the pre-kitchen table, hat in his hands. "Miles," he said heavily, "the county judge won't like hearing you brought a woman into a house that became a target." Miles stood by the window. "Decker targeted me before she came. True, but folks talk. They'll say she's in danger here. They'll say you showed poor judgment. Tully's already saying it." Rebecca, hands bandaged, sat near the stove. "Horace Tully is a coward." Mrs. Lark, pouring coffee, said, "And water is wet." Sheriff Bell sighed. "I know, but the judge is coming through tomorrow. He might ask for your star until this settles." Miles looked at the deputy's badge on the table. Rebecca understood then. This was the sacrifice taking shape, not a grand speech, not a bullet wound. His standing, his work, the one duty that kept him tied to the world. She stood. "I can leave." Miles turned sharply. "No, if my being here costs you." "No, Miles." He crossed the room, stepping close enough that she could see the sleeplessness under his eyes. "I lost my brother because I was too late," he said. The room went still, his voice roughened, but he did not look away. "Caleb rode with me, younger by 5 years. We tracked rustlers into a wash after dark. I told him to hold back. He didn't. I found him at sunrise." Rebecca's chest tightened. "After that," Miles said, "I kept thinking if I was hard enough, fast enough, alone enough, I could stop losing things. Then I saw you on that platform, standing like the whole world had struck you, and you would not fall. You think I'm protecting you because you're weak. I'm not. I'm standing beside you because you reminded me what courage looks like when it has no gun in its hand." Rebecca's eyes burned. Sheriff Bell looked down. Mrs. Lark wiped the same cup twice. Miles picked up his badge and held it in his palm. "If the judge wants this back, because I gave an honest woman shelter and refused to let cowards run her off, he can have it." Rebecca whispered, "Do not throw away your life for me." His answer came quiet. "I'm trying to stop throwing it away." The county judge did ask for the badge the next day. Miles gave it to him without argument in front of the jail, while Horace Tully watched from the boardwalk with satisfaction too small for his face. The judge called it temporary. The town called it disgrace. Miles said nothing, but Rebecca saw what it cost him. That night, she sat at the kitchen table with bandaged hands and wrote 3 letters. One to the county judge, one to Sheriff Bell's cousin in Abilene, who handled freight contracts, one to Mrs. Harper, asking if she might speak truth about the fever night. Then she waited. Kindness, she had learned, could keep a person warm. But sometimes justice needed work boots. The hearing was held in the church because no other building could hold the crowd. By then, Rance Decker had been caught 20 miles north with a wounded shoulder and Miles Pruitt's bullet crease across his hat brim. The captured outlaw had traded testimony for mercy and admitted the raid had been planned before Rebecca Mercer ever arrived in Mercy Creek. That should have ended the matter. It did not. Towns are slow to surrender a story they enjoy telling. Horace Tully stood before the judge and spoke of propriety, risk, and moral appearance. He used fine words to say Rebecca had brought trouble, though everyone in the room knew trouble had worn spurs long before she stepped off the train. Rebecca sat with Mrs. Lark on one side and Mrs. Harper on the other. Her wrists ached under clean bandages. Her blue dress had been brushed, mended, and pressed. It was still plain. It was still the dress of a woman with little, but she no longer felt like nothing. Miles sat across the aisle, hat in his hands, unbadged coat dark against the pew. His face was unreadable. Only his thumb moving once along the brim betrayed him. The judge, a narrow man with tired eyes, turned to Rebecca. "Miss Mercer, you might speak?" The church quieted. Rebecca stood. For a moment she saw the platform again. The bill, the telegram, the faces waiting for her to crumble. She felt the old hunger, the old cold, the old shame of being measured by money and found empty. Then she looked at Miles. He gave no nod, no smile, no signal. He simply watched her as if he trusted her to stand. "So she did. I came to Mercy Creek because a man asked me to marry him," she said. "That was foolish, perhaps. Desperate, certainly. But it was not dishonest. I arrived poor. Poverty is not a crime, though some have treated it like one. No one moved. I was refused publicly. Deputy Pruitt did not rescue me from work. He found me work. He did not buy my dignity. He made room for me to keep it." Horace shifted in his pew. Rebecca turned slightly toward him. "When I was accused of theft, proof cleared me. Not favor, not sentiment, proof. When outlaws came to Mr. Pruitt's ranch, they came because of his duty, not because of me. I helped save his horses because they were living creatures trapped in fire. I would do it again." Her voice trembled then, but did not break. "I have been called a railroad bride like that is all I am. I am Rebecca Mercer. I can cook, mend, read accounts, nurse fever, calm a frightened child, and work until my hands bleed. I came here penniless. I did not come worthless." A sound moved through the church, not speech exactly, but breath, returning to people who had been holding it. Mrs. Harper stood, holding her little girl by the hand. "My daughter is alive because of her." Sammy Wilkes stood next, red-faced. "She never touched that brooch." Mrs. Locke rose with both hands planted on the pew in front of her. "And if half this town had her backbone, I'd have less foolishness to listen to over coffee." A few people laughed softly. Even the judge's mouth twitched. Sheriff Bell stood last. "Miles Pruitt is the best deputy I ever had. If standing by Miss Mercer is poor judgment, then I pray this county finds more of it." The judge looked at Horace Tully. "Mr. Tully, have you anything useful to add?" Horace's face had gone gray. "Only that emotions are high." The judge picked up the deputy's star from the table. "Truth often raises them." He called Miles forward. Miles walked to the front, and the church watched the judge pin the star back on his coat. "Deputy Pruitt," the judge said, "this county remains in need of men who know the difference between scandal and character." Miles accepted the badge, but his eyes moved to Rebecca. The judge was not finished. "I ask for Miss Mercer. The Abilene Freight Office has confirmed need of a Mercy Creek ledger clerk for rail shipments twice weekly. Mrs. Lark has offered a room until suitable housing is arranged. Mrs. Harper has offered board in exchange for nursing help as needed. It appears the woman some called unwanted is in demand." Rebecca pressed her lips together, fighting tears with everything in her. Not because she had been saved, because she had been seen. After the hearing, people gathered in the churchyard. Some came to apologize. Some came to pretend they had never been cruel. Rebecca accepted what was honest and ignored what was not. Horace approached last. "Miss Mercer," he said stiffly, "I regret the misunderstanding." Rebecca looked at the man who had once been her hope because she had been too hungry to ask whether hope was kind. "No," she said. "You regret being known." His face tightened. She stepped past him. Miles waited by the gate with his horse and wagon. The afternoon sun had warmed the church steps. Children ran between the hitching posts. Mrs. Lark was already telling Sheriff Bell. He looked too proud of himself. Rebecca stopped before Miles. "I have employment now," she said. "I hurt. And choices." "I heard that too." She studied him. "I do not need your protection in the same way." "No," he said. "You don't." The answer hurt more than she expected. though it was the answer she had wanted. Miles looked down at his hat, then back at her. The fierce deputy was still there, the hard man shaped by loss and weather. But something had opened in him, something living. I have no right to ask you for anything, because I gave what any decent man should have given, he said. Rebecca's breath caught. But I'd like to court you proper, if you'll allow it. Not because you need shelter, not because folks are watching, not because a town owes you a better story. Because when you're in my house, it feels less haunted. Because you argue with my mule and overcook coffee when you're thinking. Because you saved a calf in a storm and a child in a fever, and horses from a burning barn. Because I have spent years keeping my heart locked like a jail cell, and somehow you walked in without stealing a thing. Rebecca's eyes filled then. A wagon rolled by, and for once, she did not care who saw. You make a strong case, Deputy Prute, she said. His mouth curved. Is that a yes? It is a yes to courting properly. Slowly, with no assumptions. Yes, ma'am, and I will keep my work. I would not dare suggest otherwise. And if Gideon bites my apron again, I expect you to defend me against the mule. Hi is your oldest criminal, Miles laughed. The sound startled them both. It was rusty, brief, and beautiful. Rebecca held out her bandaged hand. For 1 second, Miles looked at it as though it were something sacred. Then he took it carefully, his fingers closing around hers in full view of the churchyard, the mercantile, the depot road, and every person who had once watched her stand alone. No one laughed this time. Weeks passed. Rebecca took the ledger position and proved faster with freight tallies than Mr. Gable himself. She helped Mrs. Harper when fever or childbirth or grief visited the poorer cabins. She kept a small room at Mrs. Lark's for propriety, but 3 evenings a week. Miles drove her out to the Prute place, where she cooked supper or mended or simply sat on the porch while he worked horses in the corral. Their love grew in ordinary ways. A cup of coffee sat near a tired hand. A shawl placed over shoulders without comment. A repaired latch, a shared biscuit. A look across a room that said, I see you, and I am still here. By winter, Mercy Creek had stopped calling Rebecca the railroad bride. Children called her Miss Rebecca. Mrs. Lark called her stubborn. Sheriff Bell called her a blessing when he thought no one heard. Miles called her Rebecca, in a voice that made the name feel like home. On the first Sunday after snow dusted the church roof, Miles walked with her down the main street after service. They passed the depot where she had once stood with 3 pennies and a broken promise. The platform was empty, except for sunlight and a stack of mail sacks. Rebecca paused. Miles paused with her. Do you think of leaving? He asked. She looked at the rails shining west, then east. I used to think a train could carry me to a life, she said. Now I think a life is built by who waits when the train leaves. Miles' hand found hers. This time, she did not offer it first. He held it openly as they walked past the station, past the mercantile, past Mrs. Lark's cafe, where warm bread fogged the window. The town saw them and made room. At the end of the street, the prairie opened wide, golden under the winter sun. The Prute wagon waited near the hitching rail, loaded with coffee, flour, lamp oil, nails, and 1 small packet of yellow ribbon Miles had bought without explanation. Rebecca saw it on the seat and smiled. For your bonnet, he said gruffly. Only if you want it. She touched the ribbon, remembering the one she had returned to Horace Tully. That ribbon had been the price of being chosen by a man who wanted money. This one was different. No bargain, no rescue with a chain hidden inside it. Just color against a hard season. She tied it around her wrist instead. Miles watched her, eyes soft beneath the brim of his hat. Then he helped her onto the wagon, climbed beside her, and turned the team toward the road home. Behind them, the railroad tracks gleamed cold and empty. Ahead, smoke rose from the Prute chimney. The barn stood repaired, and the cottonwoods lifted their bare arms to the sky. like they were giving thanks. Rebecca leaned close enough for her shoulder to touch his. Miles did not move away. The wagon rolled east through the quiet light, carrying a fierce cowboy deputy, and the woman Mercy Creek had once called Penniless toward a house where supper would be shared, lamps would be lit, and no one would ever again have to stand alone on a platform, waiting to be wanted.